And I think that's where for us as addicts, that's where it takes us, right? And that's so sad, that we end up alone and disconnected and isolated. And, I always say to people that towards the end, I was doing, because you just said that, I think you said feeling disgusting. And I really identify with that. And I always say to people, it was, as crazy as this sounds, it was all against my will for those last few years. I didn't want to do it. And I knew that I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't stop myself from doing it. It was, I'd make arrangements to meet a drug dealer, and my feet would be taking me there, and I wouldn't want to be going. It was like I didn't have control of myself. And obviously I didn't. But yeah, it was against my will. It was against my will for far too long. I just feel very thankful that, something got through and I managed to get out of that and, going full circle. I think that's why it's so important to share these stories the way that you are, the way that I'm doing it now. Because at some point, maybe someone who's struggling right now might listen to this and it's not going in. But at some point, people remember things and people go back to things, and, somewhere something happens and something changes.
I guess that's a great sort of transition segue. It's kind of where we left off as well. I do want to, dive in and talk more about addiction, the addiction rates, the mental health concerns within the queer community and our LGBT brothers and sisters. I think, the statistics are really alarming with addiction, and God forbid, the suicide rates among queer youth is just staggering. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that and sort of, where you stand as far as lending your voice and your podcast platform to addiction in the queer community. I know for me, there was a bit of internalized homophobia almost as I was, coming to terms with myself and being in the closet for such a long time and sort of using alcohol to not only become comfortable with myself, but to be comfortable with other people and other gay men and coming out of my shell. And, it worked for a while until it didn't work. Can you relate that to your own story? Is there a bit of what I said that you can relate to?
Yeah. I think for me, it was less internalized homophobia. There was definitely a journey with my acceptance of myself and my sexuality. And for a long time, I tried to avoid it, I guess, which is fairly natural. I grew up in quite a small town in England, and I grew up in quite a male-dominated environment in terms of my dad's one of many, and I've got quite a few uncles, and the sort of language that they used to use in my presence was just not very pleasant around gay people.
Yeah.
And what kind of prompted me to not want to be gay, because I didn't want to be described in the ways that I would hear them describe gay people. And I guess I attached a lot to that in terms of, well, if that is what I am, what does that mean for me? Am I a bad person? Et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I struggled with that in the run up to me coming out. And I think for me with the gay community, because I always had this sense of not belonging as I was growing up and never really fitting in and always feeling like the odd one out in school. I got bullied quite a lot because I was quite feminine, and that's just, I didn't really know what gay was then. That's just the way that I was.
Same.
Yeah, that's just how I acted and existed, and I didn't know that was feminine. That's just who I was. And yeah, I never felt like I had a place. I always felt different. And when I left my hometown in my early 20s and I moved to the city, and I intentionally did that because in my hometown I was attacked in a nightclub for being gay, and a number of men kind of jumped me and called me horrible names whilst they were attacking me, and I ended up in hospital. And I just made a decision that I didn't want to be in that town anymore, and I pursued living in a city to connect with a gay community. And the way that I connected with that community, unfortunately, was through partying, and through drink and through drugs. And there's probably like a bit of balance to this in that, like, I had some fun, I had some fun times. I really did. And, I can look back at some of those early days, and I know that I was in my early 20s and I was having a nice time to an extent. Um, but I was making connections for the wrong reasons. I was making connections in the wrong way. And I was placing so much importance on these friendships, acquaintances, that were purely kind of fostered through drinking ridiculous amounts of alcohol and taking ridiculous amounts of drugs, and, going to clubs and bars and parties constantly. And, I thought that lots of the people in my world at that time were like best friends and, all of that type of thing. And through rose tinted glasses, I know now that that's not the case. And sometimes it makes me a little bit sad, if I'm honest, because I wonder if we were all in the same boat, and if we were all having the same internal dialogue and internal battles, and we were all using alcohol and drugs to self-medicate and to mask some of the problems that we were dealing with, and making connections that way. So yeah, for me, the community, the gay community, was my way of getting validation and feeling like I was part of something. And I always wanted to be the one that could drink the most and take the most drugs. That was my role. I would rally the team. I would carry the team forward. I would be the person that would be the first to get up and dance on the tables, that would, continue the trips to the bar to get more and more and more alcohol, getting myself in debt in the process. I always wanted to be the person that was providing. I couldn't afford to do that. As long as I was being validated in this really unhealthy way, like, it didn't really matter to me.
Yeah, I completely relate to all of what you said, but there is this piece of, I don't regret many things, and there were a lot of great times and fun experiences to be had, and I don't like to shut that out either. It was a very fun time. There was a period of time where things were very fun and lighthearted,
Mm.
and alcohol hadn't become a problem yet. And I look back, in early recovery, I didn't necessarily allow myself to look back fondly at times where alcohol was involved. But
Mm.
through, different parts of therapy and becoming more comfortable with my recovery and how I classify sort of that time in my life and my addiction, I'm now able to look back and still have fond memories of the fun
Mm.
that was had in these great times and moments in my life where alcohol happened to be involved, but they were still fun, positive experiences. And I can look back now and allow myself to remember them fondly, which I think is important.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really nice to hear you say that, because in my first 12 months of sobriety, I was a bit more not as measured as you've just described, and was very much, this has ruined my life. And
Yeah.
everything was kind of tainted with um, just kind of not even bittersweet, just bitterness.
Hmm.
And that kind of prompted a few difficult conversations with some people in my network and some people in my social circle. And I remember one of my friends saying to me something like, "Oh, so did you never have a nice time then with us?" And that really hit me, actually, that I've got goosebumps now thinking about it, and I felt quite guilty, because I think I'd spent my first 12 months of sobriety really speaking quite negatively about my past and forgetting that the people who'd been in my past, some of the people that were still around, and actually they were friends. It's not the people, I always met lots of people in
Sure.
clubs and bars and would drink and do drugs together and then, never see them again. But
Right.
people who stuck around, yeah, and it was just a little reminder for me, actually. Yeah, I had some great times. I had some great times connecting with that community, and um, I never thought that I would be in a position where I would kind of be able to acknowledge that and make peace with that and look back at it fondly. And now I definitely can. I think as I got into my third year of sobriety, the amount of space and time between my addiction ending and where I am now, um, time's just a healer, isn't it? And it's a cliche, but it just gives you
So
that
true.
perspective. It really gave me perspective, and I'm at peace with it. I'm okay with it.
It really is a great reminder, too, of how we grow and develop and how far we've come for myself, at least looking back and allowing myself that grace and understanding that I wouldn't act that way anymore, or that I wouldn't allow myself to be in perhaps the same circumstances, and understanding that that is a part of personal growth. And I think
Yeah,
allowing ourselves that grace is important. So I'm glad we got to discuss that.
yeah, me too. Because it's not often actually I talk about that element, and I still go to fellowship meetings and I love them, but sometimes it can feel a little like not the right thing to talk about, like some of the fond experiences
Right.
um, in the rooms, if that makes sense. But yeah, I think it comes with time, and I think it comes as you get more comfortable with who you are, where you are in your sobriety journey, etc. So yeah, I've definitely matured in that space.
Tell me about the fellowship community in Manchester. What are the rooms like? What is the sort of sense of community like within the fellowship?
It's incredible. It's incredible. It's so connected. Manchester has got a number of meetings every single day. And I remember when I was in treatment, my therapist, Steve, who was our group leader, a couple of weeks in, he started to say to me, you need something else. Rehab's not going to fix you. It's not going to keep you sober. You need something for when this finishes. And um, I wasn't interested in the fellowship, because I had some massive prejudices, some some real deeply rooted preconceptions around religion and the type of people that would be in there. And although my family is super religious, as a gay man, like I've got some massive issues with religion, and so the fellowship just wasn't appealing to me. And then there was a girl in my group who was much younger than me, and she was going along to meetings and really loving them. And she was going to a young person's meeting, and she was saying how she got a lot of identification in this meeting. And I was like, okay, I'm going to give it a try. And it was during COVID, so actually, I say going to these meetings. They were all on Zoom, so you didn't even have to leave your house to go to a meeting,
Right.
which was pretty convenient, right?
Yeah.
Um, so one Tuesday night, I dialed into this young person's meeting and sat and listened. And well, first of all, introduced myself as a newcomer. And so many people messaged me like with warm wishes and nice messages. And straight away, you're like, wow, this is so supportive. Um, and I sat and listened to all of these people, as I said to you earlier, describe my thoughts and my brain. And I always say I was kind of equal parts elated and equal parts really angry, because it was the first time, I think, even though I was in rehab, I was going to rehab every day. I still hadn't really classified myself as an alcoholic or an addict. That was the moment where I was like, okay, yes, I am that, I kind of sit in this camp. But found a lot of comfort in the sense of community, and lots of people messaged me after my first meeting, and some of those people that messaged me after my first meeting, I still see regularly today. Manchester's got quite a close-knit community. There are a lot of LGBTQ plus meetings, which are incredible. So in the week, there are 3, there's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then we have on a Saturday morning, there's a specific gay man's meeting. And I'd go as far as saying the gay man's meeting on a Saturday morning, it kind of saved me when I came out of treatment, because I was going through some kind of who am I identification type issues, like what am I without booze and what am I without drugs and the clubs, and like I don't know what I'm interested in, I don't know what I'm into, like I don't know how to connect with people other than through those mechanisms. And I'd heard about this gay man's meeting, and I even had a bit of prejudice about that, and maybe that was some internalized homophobia, because I was partly like, oh, classic gay men wanting to have their own thing separate. Why can't we just have normal meetings that are not exclusive? Like, what's so different? You go to a meeting, you share, you connect, you leave. Why does there need to be a gay men's meeting? And I was hesitant to go. But I went, and it was really game changing, because what I found was I was able to share about things that I would have felt very uncomfortable sharing about in a more open, diverse meeting, i.e., how drink and drugs impacted my behaviours around sex and sex parties and grinder, all sorts of things in that space. And it never really shared about that stuff in a normal fellowship meeting. But I was hearing people talk about these things in this gay man's meeting, and it was just really freeing and really liberating, because I was able to then talk about that stuff too. And it was healing that I needed to do, that I'd never realized at the time that I needed to address some of that stuff. Because in the same way I had shame attached to my drink and drug use, I had shame attached to how I had sex. So yeah, a brilliant community, a fellowship community in Manchester, and I got lots of good friends out of it. There are lots of different meetings, and it's really nice now being a few years in, because you're not the newcomer anymore, and you go to meetings and you see people you haven't seen for a while, and you get a big hug. And so yeah, it holds. I don't go as frequently as I used to, but I guess it's less about me having a need now. And now when I show up to a meeting, I want to make sure that I share and I help, hopefully, for people that are newer to the fellowship, and hopefully they can connect with something that I'm talking about.
To bring our conversation sort of full circle, whatever that sort of small spark may be, or if we're able to plant the seed, I think it's a great thing. And I often say that we all have our own paths to recovery, but I think one constant is community, and to be able to surround yourself with others who have the same or similar lived experience. And to reference something that you said earlier, it is that relatability, and to be able to relate to someone who does have a similar experience, and not a clinician or a doctor in a very sterile setting, but someone that can relate. So I think community is so important in recovery.
So important. And I remember what my little thing was. I remember the little thing that stuck with me that I still hear in my head every day now. It was an early meeting. I was weeks in, and I remember a guy in his chair saying, as an addict, he never turned up for anything, plans with friends, special occasions, appointments, going to the doctors, going to the dentist. You know, he'd make the appointments, but he never turned up to them. Everything. And his advice in his share was turn up. You know, you've got sober, you're getting your life back. Turn up to everything, do everything. And it really struck a chord with me because what he described, I'd never turned up for anything. And when I went through my amends as part of the 12 steps, I had so many amends to make where I could think for every individual I was speaking to, for every friend or family member that I was talking to, the things in my head were where I'd let them down, where I'd not turned up for things. And yeah, it really struck a chord with me. And sometimes now, even today, when I get a bit of anxiety about something and I get cold feet and I've got something coming up and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do it. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling nervous. I hear that guy in my head turn up. And, you know, it's become a little mantra. And I think that is the power of somebody telling a story. And you take the smallest hook, right? You take the smallest thing away from that becomes part of your toolkit. And that's why, to your point, going full circle, that's why sharing these stories and sharing these lived experiences is so important.
So special. Thank you for sharing that. Karl, I always like to leave our listeners with a few tangible things or some takeaways from our conversations. If someone is struggling today, what are a few things that they can do when they turn their headphones off to spark their journey or to plant a seed? What are a few takeaways you'd like to leave our listeners with?
So I had a couple of techniques. For me, changing my physical environment was huge. It literally, if you don't want to go outside, changing the room that you're in. And it sounds really simplistic, but I would get so in my head and I would sit ruminating and cycling in these thought processes. And just changing my physical environment really helped to just slow down some of those thought processes, create a bit of capacity. I would always try and get outside. So if I was indoors, I would try and get outside. Another one that was really kind of important for me, I had a few people that I guess in terms of support network, I was just very close to. And I think it's important to have people, and particularly people in the fellowship, perhaps, you've got their contact details, you're in regular contact with them. And if you're struggling, being comfortable with being vulnerable and saying, I'm not feeling great, I'm not okay, I need to chat, I need some support. And I really struggled with that. That was so counterintuitive to me because I was always wearing a mask and presenting a I'm okay type, even though most people knew that I wasn't okay because they could see the chaos. But yeah, I think being able to be vulnerable and having a couple of people in your support network that you can line up to just reach out to and let them know if you're having a tough time. Because typically, I can remember times where I've been in full meltdown and jumping on the phone to someone for 15, 20 minutes, total game changer. Total game changer.
Karl, what's the best way for folks to reach out if they're inspired by our conversation today or if they'd like to connect with you online?
So on Instagram, you will find me at whatnext.cal, and you'll find the podcast page, which is at whatnext.podcast.
I will link all of Karl's information and the show, the What Next podcast, in today's show notes. Highly recommended. Karl, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad that we got to connect. Please keep in touch. I would love to perhaps work on something together in the future or continue our chat. I'm very happy and grateful that we got to connect.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate you having me on. The feedback on the podcast is really lovely to hear. Yeah, this conversation has been wonderful and has been It's really kind of humbling, and I've reflected on a couple of things that we've spoken about. I feel like, the conversation has come at the right time, so thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today, friend. Hopefully you heard something that resonates with you, and if we help just one person, our job is done. Make sure you check today's show notes for all the information discussed in today's episode and how to connect with our guests. Until next Wednesday, try your best not to drink and be good to yourself. Bye, everyone.